Okay, so time to talk about transfer cases. As I've mentioned in the last video, all of my GMT 800s, the transfer case does engage front drive shaft, which is no problem. Now, I mean, years ago, I thought that I was going to have to swap in something that would fully disengage the front drive shaft. And I have that transfer case ready for if I ever needed to. And guess what? Remember that axle in that last video I said had been in the scrap pile for 10 years? That scrap pile is behind that gate right there. And where do you think that transfer case is? It's not behind that gate, but it is right in front of that gate, just sitting outside because I don't think I'm ever gonna need it. There's the axle I used in that video behind the gate, and somewhere under all this snow is the other. Hey, look, there it is. What do you see here? Now I've started to clear away the snow. What do you see? NP241C. Hasn't quite made it to the scrap pile yet, but it's right in front of the scrap pile because it's almost on its way. Okay, so like I said in the video, back when I had this Tahoe before I swapped it, I was having some trouble with the transfer case, and I know it was in the transfer case. It was not shifting properly between 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low. It just wasn't. And so I did, think to myself that especially if I was doing a solid axle conversion, I was going to need to go and get, a manual shift transfer case. So I went and picked up an NP241C. But also, in my experience in the off-road world, I knew that I could use this adapter here, which allows me to slip into where the front output shaft is on the Chevy and use a 1310 double carbon style front shaft. So I decided to use that first and not change out my transfer case. And once I did that, my problems with my transfer case just went away. After the solid axle swap, all of my transfer case shifting problems went away. I have no idea what the real function was that changed that, but I've also talked to other customers that have bought my parts and done the swap who are also having transfer case problems, and then as soon as I did the swap, they went away. So just like in that clip earlier, that transfer case is just sitting outside. I have no reason to swap it in. It's an NP241C, so let's talk about that one first. The 241C is essentially the same as the electric shift case. It's the same ratio, everything. It just has a manual shift to it instead of an electric encoder motor to shift it. It's essentially the same length. So it's a case that could be swapped in place of your current case if you really wanted to, but it doesn't really gain you anything. So I wouldn't really go out of my way to swap in an NP241C, especially because most of us have Tahoes and Suburbans. We've got this big center console in the middle, so putting a shifter is kind of awkward. There is companies like this one here that does sell cable shifters for the NP241, which makes it easier. You can put that shifter a little bit more conveniently for you and not have it in the way where, if you were using like a mechanical linkage, you'd be a little more bound by where you can put it. But that's also because the 241 has good support in the aftermarket, mostly because it came in Jeeps. A version of the 241 was the case used in the Jeep JK Rubicons. It's not the same 241 that we have. It shares some components, but it's not even close to the same case. But the shifter can be used on it. The 241 also came in the Dodge trucks that we use as donor trucks to get our front axles from. So it's a pretty common case. So that's one worth talking about. It is a manual shift case, and it does disconnect the front drive shaft when you put it in two-wheel drive. Other options for transfer cases would be like an NP205. That's one that the guys that are scared of breaking a transfer case, they want something beefy and strong. An NP205 is cast iron, and it's heavy, and it's gear to gear. There's no chain, and so they want to use that. Well, the NP205 only has a 1.98 to 1 ratio on the 4 low, And so if you did that, you would actually need to have some kind of a program flashed into your PCM, because the Chevy computer does not actually use engine RPM to determine when to shift the automatic transmission. It actually uses transmission output shaft speed to calculate when to shift it, which I know seems kind of weird. I always thought it'd make way more sense to use engine RPM, but hey, whatever. But anytime you go to a different transfer case ratio, you have to flash that into the computer, and you have to have some kind of a micro switch on the linkage or on the transfer case. So if you had like an NP205, that when you put it in 4 low, it triggers that wire and tells the computer you're in 4 low and tells it to start running that shift strategy on the automatic transmission shift schedule. So the NP205 can be swapped in, but it is stronger potentially, but you do lose quite a bit of low range. I mean, the NP241C and all the electric shift cases are 25% lower in 4 low. That's quite a bit. I mean, that's substantial. So I wouldn't be too worried to swap in an NP205 if it were me. I've done it in the past. They're not really worth it. Now that brings up a couple of other options, and that's going to be like the Off-Road Designs doubler kit and other doubler kits that are out there. The Off-Road Designs being the most popular. Now the doubler kit, I've done it. I've done an Off-Road Designs doubler in the past. Really cool kit. Gets you double low. It gets you all kinds of, variations in 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive low, double low, too high, too low, etc. And that is a cool kit, but as I mentioned earlier, the PCM uses a strategy to shift the transmission, and there's no way to have 2 low-range strategies in the computer and trigger them separately. So you won't shift properly if you put a doubler in your truck. The only way that you can really do that in these modern trucks is if you swap in, take your 4-wheel drive transmission out and put in a 2-wheel drive transmission that has, like a 2-wheel drive 4L80E or something, that has an output shaft speed sensor in the transmission tail cone that is actually before the doubler. So now your whole system, you got this 2-wheel drive cone, which is longer with a sensor. Then you've got the adapter for the doubler. Then you've got the doubler, the first doubler in the case. Then you got the adapter between the 2 cases. And then you've got the second case. I mean, you've got this much transfer case hanging out. And then you've got to build supports to support those transfer cases, but you can't just hang those off of the back of the transmission. Your rear drive shaft is getting shorter and shorter because you're adding, this much length and things. Your front drive shaft's getting longer and longer. And so doublers are not real friendly for the type of build that most of us are doing, which is like an exploration rig. We're not building extreme off-road, rock-bouncing monsters. No trailer queens here. So we have to, factor in some of these things and not have some of the trade-offs of like a doubler, for example, to make these rigs a little bit better for long-distance exploration rigs.
Now, all the time, I'm always the first one out there to say, let's throw some 4Ds on this rig and hit some big rocks. But if you are honest with yourself, a better thing to do is to go ahead and really evaluate how you're going to use the G.
So just something to think about there. Doublers are an option, but they're not really a viable one unless you want to really do a full, powertrain workup rebuild on your vehicle. So another option that seems to be coming up a lot in my customers is that 2-wheel drive vehicles being converted to 4-wheel drive. So 241C that I talked about earlier is the case that you would use for that kind of a build, because the 241 is a manual shift, and if you have a 2-wheel drive, you don't have the body control module and the transfer case control module and all that wiring in your vehicle to control the electric shift on the transfer case. So you've got to put in a manual shift case. And that's fine. But as I mentioned, you do have to run the wire, either a new wire harness or a standalone wire all the way up to the PCM and pin it into the main connector on the switch that tells the computer that you're in 4 low, so it knows how to shift your transmission. So that's something that you'll need to do either way if you're doing a 2-wheel drive conversion. But the 241C is your best option because it is available through wrecking yard parts. The adapter between the transmission and the transfer case is all wrecking yard stuff. You just need to keep an eye out on what spline count you have on the case versus your transmission. So Chevy's has 2 spline counts. You got a 28 and a 32 spline. So if you put it's a 32 spline transfer case onto a 28 spline transmission, since it's bigger, it'll actually slide over it, but then they won't engage. And then you go, oh crap. I have had more than one customer contact me and tell me, I don't know what's wrong. My car just runs like it's in neutral, won't engage. And it's because they put a 32 spline transfer case on a 28 spline transmission. So keep an eye out for that if you are going to do it. But you do have to have your transmission removed and either swap in a 4-wheel drive transmission, or at least have your transmission disassembled completely and a 4-wheel drive output shaft put into your transmission, because the transmission output shafts are different. And so either way, if you're going to do a 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive conversion, you need to factor that in. Just a little bit extra work, but again, these are all like on the shelf available parts, that nothing really custom. This is just factory parts for the 4-wheel drive version. So just something to keep in mind for that. Also, the adapter that I showed earlier here, I now carry and offer with my parts bundle when you order parts for the Tahoverlanding Axle swap, so that you don't have to find it yourself. I try to only carry the parts that you can't get yourself, and these are getting pretty hard for people to find. So I have my first shipment coming in any day now, and now you don't have to try to sort it out and find one. I should be able to provide that for you as part of the parts bundle. So if you need one, just let me know. Thanks for watching.